Seafood is important for a million reasons. 3.2 billion people throughout the world rely on seafood for 20% of their animal protein intake. For some communities, for some governments, it is a reason to protect habitats, to protect biodiversity, and to create progressive regulation for how we manage our oceans.
So seafood itself is hugely important to the contributions of simply putting food on a plate. Beyond that, the industry of seafood production, both directly and indirectly, employs something like 60 million people globally. So not just actually putting food on plate, but giving people livelihood so they can go about purchasing that food. So for all of those reasons, seafood is a critical component of food security and the amount of food that we as a global society can make use of. So in the field, we use a lot of active techniques to look at how animals use space and what that means for how we might manage those species using things like marine protected areas. And in the lab, we focus on taking fisheries data and using that to say something about how fisheries stocks are doing and how we might better sustainably harvest those stocks. In a fisheries management context, our target is often maximum sustainable yield. In other words, the number of fish that you can continually remove from a population year over year while still having that population exist and produce more fish. In practice, however, oftentimes our total allowable catch or our catch limits established for the population hedge below that, because it is right at the point at which you go a little bit too far. You take a little bit more than maximum sustainable yield, and now you're overfishing a population. If you continue to do so, you can crash that population.
When a population is too low or below a prescribed threshold, it's considered overfished. Overfishing is the act of taking out more fish than can be sustainably caught while still maintaining a population. So the harvest rate is just too high.
The ecological aspect of the overfishing is that there are cascade effects along the ecosystems, and the other very or huge impact of the overfishing are the social aspect of this problem. More people in poverty, more industries or more economies that basically are declining. Overfishing goes beyond the target species itself. My name is Octavio Aburto Oropeza. I am an associate professor at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. I do research in small-scale fisheries, marine protected areas, and also coastal ecosystems. Small-scale fisheries contribute with almost half of the fishery landings that are recorded every year all around the world.
If you zoom in to the US, we're doing quite well in terms of managing our assessed stocks, our large stocks that we do assessments on. We have something like 230 of those, and only about 30 of those are considered overfished. From that perspective, I would argue that we're doing fairly well.
My name's Tanner Saraspi. I come from a third-generation fishing family here in San Diego. My grandfather's been fishing in San Diego since the early 60s, and my father's been fishing for about 35 years here. The fishery here in San Diego, it's been our source of income and our livelihood. It's kept a roof over my head the entire time I've been growing up. Now my brother's a commercial fisherman and I myself am a commercial fisherman. I deckhand on my dad's boat, both for lobster and spot prawn season. There's only 15 permits in the state of California for spot prawn. My dad has one of 15. You know, jumbo spot prawn, they're the largest West Coast species of shrimp. And they're there's very strict regulations on it in terms of the size of the mesh on the traps. We're also limited by the count, how many traps we can have and how many traps we can fish at a time. We're as protective about our oceans as a lot of others are, and that we want to see the next generation be able to get out there and fish and sustain our livelihoods. So I think that's a really key point, and I think people need to understand that fishermen want to see the fish in the ocean.
So fisheries on the whole in California and on the West Coast are very healthy, and that's true throughout most of the United States. However, when you look at the global picture of overfishing, it changes a little bit, where up to a third of commercial fisheries throughout the world are overfished.
There's lots and lots of small-scale fisheries that we have very little information on, and I would argue that a lot of those are most likely overfished and undergoing overfishing. Those stocks tend to be in locations where people rely most heavily on them for food security. And so I think when we're talking about overfishing, there's the abstraction of global fisheries, And then there's the practical reality of some stocks are more important to some groups of people, depending on how you look at the problem.
Biggest, most transformative piece of legislation that we've had in the United States on fisheries is, without a doubt, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. It does things like sets annual catch limits, creates regional fishery management councils, and requires rebuilding plans for species that are overfished. So, without a doubt, the Magnuson-Stevens Act is what has driven us to be in such good shape in terms of healthy fisheries in the United States. Most of our fisheries are managed very, very well on the West Coast. And in fact, in 2017, NOAA found that 3 species of rockfish had been rebuilt and came off of the overfished list.
I think that's a testament to the fact that in places like California, where you have a well-managed stock or a good system of data that you can identify those stocks that are overfished, and put on top of that the political power and willpower socially, it can happen. And California rockfishes are a great example of that.
My name is Brian Klobowski. I'm a staff research associate here at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, working in Dr. Jennifer Smith's lab on commercially applied native seaweed species. Seaweed's amazing because as far as efficiency of converting energy from the sun into nutrition goes, it's one of the best things on the planet. So if you're looking to have high nutrition output with an efficient primary producer in that it's taking energy directly from the sun, taking nutrients from the environment, and transferring it into nutrition it can use or we can eat, then it's an all-star. And that's why it's amazing to have so many species right here off California that are native that also have high nutrition value. In a single lifetime in the past 50 years, we've had more change happen to our planet as it relates to our food systems and our influence on the planet than all of the previous history combined. Population in the last 50 years more than doubled. Our use of food and need for water more than tripled, and our use of fossil fuels more than quadrupled.
But 3 things are very important when we talk about fisheries: temperature of the ocean, the acidification of the ocean, and the amount of oxygen that we see in the ocean.
Like humans, fish need oxygen, and there are areas within the ocean that there's so little oxygen that fish can't exist. Through climate change in lots of areas, that area of oxygen minimum zone is moving shallower and shallower, and in places like our coast, it's reducing the amount of habitat for fish that rely on that rocky reef. There's also changes in ocean acidification over time, which we know is going to have dramatic impacts on things like
clams, mussels, oysters in general, the larvae of many of these animals that use calcium carbonate to create their shells. The acidification of the ocean is impacting this calcification, and for that reason there is a higher mortality of many of these fishery resources.
Also in terms of impacting the ecosystem that those species exist within. So Dungeness crab rely on lots of things that also rely on the carbonate in the ocean. The other thing that's changing very dramatically is the range and distribution of species. And we've seen a large uptick in tropical species. You're seeing those range distributions shift as a function of most strongly changes in ocean temperature, and I would expect that to continue into the future.
And this could be a good news for fisheries. The problem is that many other species are restricting or disappearing from many parts, especially the temperate areas and the polar areas.
Wild capture is basically flatlined and has been for several years. Even in spite of more effort being used to catch the same amount of fish, aquaculture is continuing to grow. And in order to feed 9 billion people, we're going to have aquaculture be a part of that solution if you want to sustainably continue to grow our population. The big question, how do we get to an entirely sustainable food system? I think it's possible. I think it's going to take a coordinated effort.
To have an entirely sustainable seafood industry, you would need end-to-end traceability. You would need to know where the fish was caught, how it was caught, how the workers on the boat were treated, where it was landed, who bought it, how it was sold, and how it ended up in your restaurant.
Everything that we extract from the ocean is a common good. You are the owner of that resource. I am the owner of that resource. The whole humanity is the owner of that resources. So the only thing in order to make transparent this process, we need to know how much we extract and who is receiving the economic benefit of this exploitation.
In my view, the best bet is to have strong local regulations and laws, buy locally, and have as few steps as possible between you and the person who caught the fish.